Hey everybody, how's it? Aloha, this is Jeeps here on the World Music Reaction and Review channel. And look who I have here with us, Marty O'Donnell.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to meet you, George.
Very nice
Should I
to
call
meet
you
you.
George, or is that a bad thing to do?
No, George is fine, but everybody knows me as Jeebs. Because
Okay,
my dad's
I'll
name.
call you Jeeves. It's a weird name, so there you go.
Good, I'll take that. Just ask Jeebs.
Ask Jeeves.
So I'm so excited to have you here on the channel because it was such a unique path that took me to reacting to that Halo video, of which brought a lot of people here. We'll talk about in just a second. And funny enough, though, to call back on something that I just saw, I believe you just did a presentation like in Portugal that you actually talked about that path and how those paths can be different to get to where you think you may want to go. But in this case, I had no idea where I wanted to go. I do this video, it blows up on the channel, and two things happened to me. One, it was a personal thing because Halo was the only game that I ever played. I'm not a gamer. It was something that I put into my recording studio and got involved in, and then in between sessions, so bad that actually I started canceling sessions or things going, no. Well, not telling them I'm stuck in a campaign or something, but so obviously the visceral reaction that I had when I listened to that track and I did that reaction to it was like, I didn't know the titles or anything. I was just kind of going, where on the soundtrack should I listen to something? And I apparently hit, the sonic G-spot of tons of people, that had that response of nostalgia. And it's such an iconic couple of melodies, actually. You have a couple of things throughout that are very iconic.
Yeah, they're actually, I think what you did was believe it or not, two different pieces that were used over time for basically two different kinds of emotional journeys of the players. But they went together nicely inside the sort of suite that I put together for the soundtrack. So that was fun to see you sort of do this, like, oh, this is now we're changing. Now this is something different. Oh, I'm getting a different vibe. I'm getting a different feel. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Perfect.
Yeah, and that's the thing. All of my, I have a heavy metal reaction channel that popped up on my radar a couple of years ago. I got like 250,000 people there. Wow. And also this channel is starting to grow pretty fast. And I don't do reactions as a composer. I don't do reactions in the geekiness of our world,
right?
Because I believe that what I like to call the pure listener. I have a better time reacting to, number one, listening. The heavy metal channel is a brand new journey for me for sure. Cool. And so listening to different prog rock all the way to the hardcore, metalcore, mellow death, and all the subgenres and stuff. That when I explain the things that I do, I talk about. What are you feeling when you hear this, or why, most people don't know there's French horns and strings and Comfortably Numb and Pink Floyd and stuff like that. Sure. Why do you get that feeling? I think even in the reaction I did on Halo, I think I may have mentioned what the French horns kind of make you feel. Yeah. Like this big hugging embrace, like a warm, comfortable, and that's what I loved about what you were doing with your composition with Halo. Before I get that, though, I do want to ask you a couple questions. This is very unique. You are actually a gamer, would you consider, or at least you're more involved in being like a composer that gets hired to do a gaming gig. You play games as well, don't you?
Well, no, I got into this. The reason I even went into this business of composing for games was I was a composer in the traditional sense of the word. I had, a master's in composition from USC, taken piano my whole life, was in a prog rock band. But professionally, I was a composer for film and television and commercials. But the entire time, from the very, very beginning of computer games, I was playing computer games back when they were,
Pong.
Dot matrix printer printout of a text adventure game. And then Pong, of course, was the thing that I remember when I was able to do that on the television. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, because wow, I'm controlling the TV, which is usually controlling me. So that was a wonderful thing. And so, yeah, I was there from the very beginning of all these things, the first Atari, and then definitely bought the first Nintendo system for the home for my children. And of course,
of which still lives inside, deep within.
so I played so much Nintendo. I was completely hooked on the first Zelda, for example. I did things in that first Zelda that almost nobody I know has been able to do. So
as a player.
As a player, of course.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. And this is before.
You see, there's some of that bravado. That's that Game Boy bravado. You know, it's like
absolutely. I will show you proof that I can. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was the whole time I was doing music professionally. I was having my free time. I was spending a lot of time playing whatever games I could. So I loved games. So when after 20 years of doing jingles, basically, or 15 maybe. When the game thing came along, and it was like, oh, now the production value of the audio side of games changed from being very primitive 8-bit or highly compressed tiny little sound files. It came to a point where I realized I could bring some of my expertise and talent to bear in the game industry, and so I wanted to get in the game industry as a composer and audio producer. So yeah, but I think it's been an advantage for me to really viscerally love playing games and understanding how games are designed and how they're put together, and not just be a composer.
No, that's
there's anything wrong with that. There are tons of people who are great game composers who don't actually really like games.
And that leads me, but this leads me into something which is great. I want to talk about because it's your partner, Michael Salvatori. Mm-hmm. Is that I'm sorry, forgive me.
Salvatori.
You had said something in there that Michael just never picked up a paddle or anything, and he very happy to work with you. Before we talk about that, tell me a little bit about you and Michael meeting.
Oh, well, gosh, we go all the way back. I think I was 18 years old. I was in my first year of college. I was which was at a conservatory, and I was in a piano class, and I don't even remember exactly what kind of class it was, but there was a girl there who was a sophomore and I was a freshman, and I don't know what it was. I was kind of being flirtatious because that's what you do when you're 18, and I made her laugh a bunch of times. She just thought I was funny because I was. So after the class, she's like, oh, you're funny, you should come meet my husband. And I'm like, oh.
Oh, there it is, full stop.
Okay, that's the end of that one.
There goes a little blue pill. All right, see ya.
Yeah, so like, wow, you're a sophomore and you're already married. So, but I did. I went over to where to meet her husband, and her husband was Mike Salvatori, and so we just he was he's a year older, and we hit it off. He was in a band. I was starting a band in college, and the rest is history, so they say. We became really good friends, and he was a guitar player, and he was self-taught. He had 2 Sony recorders, were reel-to-reel recorders. He had 2 of them, so he could.
We mean like hooked up with the SMPTE?
No, nothing. There was no. This is 1970.
Back in the 1900s. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. 1974.
Okay. Oh wow, jeez,
yeah. So he had 2 recorders, and he was really into figuring out how to record his band, or record himself, and then tape on tape. He would just hit play, and I think he was able to feed the signal directly into the other tape machine, and then he could overdub on top of that.
Yeah, and the bouncing tracks back and forth.
And so I'm like, hey, can you come over and record this in my basement with my band? And he did. So we started. That's how we ended up. He was kind of always the self-taught guitar playing engineer guy. And then I went off to grad school and, all my highfalutin degrees, and he built a recording studio in his basement after we had both actually recorded our bands in somebody else's little basement recording studio. This is when, this is where your 6 years youngerness is going to show up, because this probably sounds like really old tech to you, but like the Tascam came out with an 8-track machine. Do you
It was
remember
called the
the real
38.
Tascam?
Was it called the 38 or something like that? It was 8-track, had all the buttons right in
Yeah,
here. Yeah, of
yeah,
course,
and it
yeah.
had and it was just an 8-track. I think it was half inch. Yeah, it was a half-inch machine. And the first guys to get one of those in the Chicago suburbs area, I went and I happened to have known somebody, and they said, "You have a band. Why don't you come over and let us experiment, on how to learn how to record by recording your band for free." So of course we had no money, and it was the idea of being recorded for free was great, and it was just a total fiasco. It was just horrible. And I remember playing the final mixtape for my friend Mike, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is that's great. That's wonderful, right?" And of course, apparently inside his head is like, "Oh man, if I'm going to go to that studio and I'm going to get such a better recording of my band." And he went and had an awful time also. So I went off to grad school, and he decided to buy the same equipment and build something in his basement and take some recording engineering classes and figure out how to do it the right way. And he did. So I went the composition route, and he went the recording engineer route. So after living in California for a few years and getting my degree and having a baby, we came back to the Chicago area, and Mike and I hooked up all the way back in 1982. That's when he and I actually started in business together. And it was like I had some contacts and some energy in the entertainment business, and he had the recording studio, and we worked well together and enjoyed our, collaboration. And did that for decades. So
those back end stories are so cool because, for what I know, composers such as yourself who are very, successful, we see only what we see from that point forward.
Yeah.
Oh, Marty O'Donnell, he's the Halo composer. No. Halo came in more than halfway through a career of all this that came to that.
Yeah. Game composing was essentially my second career. I already had a very successful career. Mike and I had O'Donnell Salvatori, and we were jingle and film composers in Chicago. We moved the studio, built out several different studios over the years in Chicago, and we were known as a music house production company in Chicago. And it was when I saw that games got better in the early 90s that I decided, hey, I think we need to include this. I would rather be doing game composing than composing more jingles. I had gotten really tired of jingles. You know how that is.
Yeah, that's
probably.
It's in the elbow, and it does get you can get a burnout going pretty fast on that. So through the 90s, you had already scored, or is that what they call it in the video game world, or composed to? Mm-hmm. Already a couple of video games. What were the name of the video games or the offshoots of video games that you guys worked on?
Well, the first published games were in 1997. One was Riven, the sequel to Myst. So Myst was a huge title that kind of ended up selling the CD-ROM. It was the game that everybody had to have a CD-ROM in order to play. And Riven was the sequel that came out like 3 years after Myst came out. And we, through some connections, were able to do all the sound design, or the majority of the sound design. There's a whole long story there about how big that project ended up getting. And I worked with Robin Miller, who had done the score to Myst, and he was one of the brothers who worked on Myst and Riven. So I'd helped Robin sort of set up his studio, and he did the music for Riven, but we did the sound design, and I helped him a little bit just setting up his studio. I was hoping to do music for Riven, but didn't get the opportunity. That was something Robin really wanted to do, which was fine. But that was our foray into the constraints and the world of audio for video games. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time we were working on Riven, there was a company in Chicago called Bungie, and they were about to do a new thing called Myth, M-Y-T-H, which turned into Myth: The Fallen Lords. And So I contacted them and said, look, I'm working on Riven. You should hire us to do your stuff. And they
The
immediately
hustle.
did.
Hustle.
No, hustling like crazy.
That's such an unsung important part about being a composer, and we'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah, sure.
Is that hassle aspect of it? But
Yep.
my hat's off to you for doing that, because I didn't. With my life as a composer, being a library composer, I settled into a couple publishers, and that was
Okay.
it. I wrote a bunch of music. I'd get an order, write a bunch of music, turn it in, probably do about 50 to 70 tracks a year, turn it in with all the reduced mixes and all the stems and everything, and then I'd go surfing.
Wow. Okay.
And then obviously you get a check every quarter, enough to buy a bar of wax, or, or in my case, maybe if it's a really good check, I can put lobster in my top ramen. You know what I mean? Based on the royalties, on that whole thing. We'll also talk about that a little later. So
as a commercial composer, I was in Chicago hustling all my connections. I was the guy who did the hustle. Mike is sort of
I could see that.
Yeah, he's the back at home engineer, hooking all the wires up and being sort of quiet and contemplative. And I was out selling and finding new gigs and pushing.
So you were like the old powerful Oz, and he was the man behind the curtains going,
yeah.
So,
kind of, sure, I'll take that.
No, so that's really great that you kind of ramped up to that, because the Bungie relationship now, so now we can get into the whole Halo thing.
Yeah.
So you make communications with Bungie, and so I take it that first job, I don't, maybe I cut you off, but did you end up getting that gig that you
yeah
hustled
and
for?
on that gig we were, I told them I wanted to be, what they needed was an audio director, and that was 1997. And as you know, in the film and television world, there is no such thing as audio director.
Yeah, I never heard of that. When I saw that on your, and I said, audio director, what a trip.
Since my father, this is the reason why, as we, we'll probably get into the parental and the legacy sort of from your parents and stuff. My mom was a piano teacher. My dad was a film director. So when I used to be a kid and I would work on the set where my dad was a director, and he edited his own films, and he, color corrected. He did, he was in the weeds on all of his films. But I saw what he did on the set. I saw who he was as director. And then I started seeing, in the film world, because we were working in the film world, I saw that there were directors, and then on every production there was probably an art director. But when it came time to talk about the audio, there was the re-recording mixer, who was the person who put it all together at the end. And the re-recording mixer would sit in the studio with the music track and the sound effects tracks and the dialogue tracks, and be mixing it all together, and sitting next to him telling him what to do was the editor. There was no audio person. It was either the director of the film telling the re-recording mixer what he wanted, or the editor telling him what needed to happen. And if we ever got invited as composers to the final mix, it was like, final mix, put on a tie,
right,
quietly in this dark theater watching the film being mixed.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while I was like, please, sir, can I have some more? It was like this. Who's talking?
You're gonna make me run and get my asthma spray. Don't do that. I'm just gonna. That's so true. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, and so at that point I'm like, doggone it! I don't like this position. I have some, even if we were doing sound design, or we had started, as the technology got better, our studio got better, and we started like, hey, we can record the dialogue, we can record the voiceover right here. Why don't you bring, Fred, the voiceover guy, in, and we'll record it. And then, no, we could do sound design. We'll do the sound design for the commercial along with the music. We'll do the final mix. So it took years for us to get to the point where we were doing the final mix. And so we could have the agents, the clients, right in our studio while we did everything. And that's what I was like, okay, I like that. I like being in the creative person who's like, the art director is all about the look of something. Mm-hmm. The audio director is all about the sound of something. So you don't have competing music's buried under sound effects, which is all buried under voiceover. You have someone who has an ear and maybe even worked on creating all of those elements, or at least has some vision for bringing all those elements together, and then can direct them. Now, when it comes to a film, the director is still the sort of final voice on everything. But the directors I've worked with who appreciate my sort of audio expertise and approach and aesthetic, usually they're like, wow, I'm glad you are doing this and are in charge of this. And when they have suggestions, I'm like, yeah, that's a great suggestion. But you're not just some, you're not the composer who never gets invited to the mix, or you're not the sound designer who didn't know that at the same time you're doing an explosion, the composer is doing a giant cymbal hit. And then and then the editor doesn't everybody's taken by surprise at the mix that everybody's piling on that same frame, right?
Well, that's why, forgive me for 1 second. If you saw me about 2 minutes ago, I made this kind of sighing face like this. It was because I've experienced in mixing some of the films that I've done that because of budgeting and stuff like that, that sometimes the dialogue guy is doing the master mix because it's all in the same studio and they don't have that, let's just say, audio mapping in the head on what takes precedence during a scene. And then if it's the effects guy that might have done also the dialogue and the stuff, he's going to want his dialogue and effects to be hotter, because that's his tantara, and then all of a sudden that symbol that you work so hard on lining up your code and everything and making sure when that explosion happened or whatever the action was against the composition gets buried because, and I'm not flaming, Jeff, trust me, I'm not flaming the sound engineering guy, but it's just what you're saying is so important.
Yeah, and what I think is, I actually think that this is a place where, of course, now we're going to get into like how some of this gets mutated in the game business, but at least my approach was there should be an audio director on a film project or a TV show. And the audio director should have a vision for what's going on to the extent where the audio director says, hey, composer, I think it would be great if you hit this explosion cue with timpani and cymbal, or do something musical here. That's going to be great. And then I can go talk to the sound designer and say, hey, sound designer, the music guy is going to do this. You don't have to work on that. Or, oh my gosh, the sound design guy did this amazing explosion, which works so perfectly. Hey, music guy, leave a hole in your music. Actually compose something that leaves a hole there so that the sound design can come forward. So it's not a surprise at the final mix, right? I mean, if an audio director has the vision for the audio experience of the audience, and that's the only thing I think is what an audio director should be. The audio director should be saying, what is coming out of the speakers at any given moment, and how should that be crafted, and who's crafting it? So I think TV and film should have audio directors too, but I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime. We'll see. But I knew the games business was new enough that I could just go in and talk to these young kids who were making video games and say, well, I'm this old experienced guy, and of course what you need is an audio director. And they were like, okay.
Well, it worked out to both Bungie, Halo fans, around the world. The fact that, Halo, I think one of the magical things about Halo, the success, obviously, on the visual was the unbelievable graphics and the gaming physics that went into the whole thing. Of course, the campaign, the storytelling, and the music all folds in together. But I also believe, as somebody who's not a gamer, and because I've only just played Halo, and if I go to my grandkids' house or something like that, they're playing other games. Well, Crash Bandicoot. There was a couple things that I got myself in because it was in that circle at the time. Yeah. That the Halo project, Bungie, Team Bungie, everybody involved, you, Michael, all the what do you call them, devs, developers?
Yeah, the devs, right? The developers,
the devs,
right?
I'm a dev. You're a dev. And I didn't know what that was. What the heck is a dev? I had to look it up. Old man fail,
That's all right. I do that all the time.
It was such an extraordinary, epic shift in the gaming world, it seemed like from that point on, everything evolved in a different direction as far as now technology playing a new hand in the gaming physics, the level of which the power of music composition, hook, like you like to say, DNA, certain little things that you did to order in order to continue through Halo 1, 2,
Three
3.
ODST Reach, 5 Halos that we worked on.
Right, and thematically, your work continued to go through that process. I think it was just like the perfect storm of total creativity from top to bottom. And for me as a composer, because I come from traditional old school world and stuff like that, to me, it's like, if I'm sitting back going, wow, Marty killed it on this, man. It's like, to me, I'm thinking this is like a John Williams moment for the composers in the gaming, not comparing, but the fact that you think of John Williams, the first thing you think of is Star Wars.
Yeah.
You think of, Marty O'Donnell. What do you think of? Halo.
Sure.
And it kind of, it changed the precedence, I believe, in what can be achieved both with the gaming physics and the music moving forward.
Yeah.
So can you really briefly, for the people, my friends here on this channel, a little bit of the genesis of the Monk melody? I mean, I heard a little bit of it on something, but tell me, where did that come about?
Okay, so to back up just a little bit, I'm glad when it's actually sort of being like capturing lightning in a bottle twice, right? So if you can be known for something, that's amazing. So I have no problem being known as the Halo guy. Before I was known as the Halo guy, I was known as the "We Are Flintstones kids, 10 million strong."
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
So I was known as that guy. So I really love the fact that I'm known as the Halo guy now. So of course, this is 1999, and we had already done some projects with Bungie, and there was this new project that I was doing sound design for called Halo. I think we had just come up with the name Halo. And
okay, wait, I'm going to stop you really quick on that. So
sure.
Just before we get into this, so you were also you didn't come in as just they started something that say, hey, Marty, we need some music. You actually were part of a creative team as it went through it? Is this how this is growing?
Yeah, like I said, so with 2 projects prior, Myth the Fallen Lords, and then the sequel, Myth 2 Soul Blighter, my company, O'Donnell Salvatori, Total Audio, I was the audio director for those projects. So Bungie was already used to working with me as the audio director. So I would be casting voiceover and recording the voices, of doing all the sound design, doing the music, and putting it all together at the end. So all the final mixing and implementation in the game, how it works in the game. I was already doing that for them. So as they started working on this new project, Halo, that was the role that I just automatically was falling into.
I see.
But early in the project, it always starts this way. Music is not, there's no story yet. There's no characters. It's all proof of concept. Marines running around, cybernetic super soldier Marines running around. Oh, now they're driving what looks like kind of a jeepy thing with a gun in the back, and it's got really cool physics, and the antenna wobbles depending on what hills it's all this wonderful stuff. So I'm playing with all of that. Hey, Marty, now you have not just a rifle, you've got a rocket launcher. So, okay, show me the animation. I'm working with the animation and making rocket launcher sounds and reload sounds and explosions. Working in hey, I think we can do this with multiple speakers front and back. It wasn't Dolby surround sound at that point. There was this early version of surround sound in the game industry that had to do with speakers in front, and you could have speakers in back, and we could actually have discrete channels for four channel audio. So it was all this sort of technical proof of concept work that was a blast on Halo. And then in 1999 summer, this opportunity came up where Steve Jobs asked, there's a whole reason why this happened, but Steve Jobs was going to show an early build of Halo at Macworld in New York. So,
That's a trip. I didn't even know you had anything to do with it.
oh yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, and see, Bungie had been known as a Mac game developer. It had done Marathon for the Mac.
Okay, so
And
there's the
then when
tie-in.
Yeah, so when we worked on, and by that point, Bungie was, in the Mac Hall of Fame as game developers. I mean, they basically, because there wasn't that many of them.
Oh
But
yeah,
they
that's
also
right.
did good games.
I forgot. I just brain fart that Mac was a pinnacle of all creators. Whether you were a photo developer, Photoshop, or running a DAW, or doing that. So that's right. Mac was like the creative.
But it wasn't.
monster.
It was a creative platform, but it wasn't a game platform. It was not ever known as a very good game platform. But for example, Doom came out. And Myst came out in '93. So Doom came out in '93. Myst came out in '93. Myst was created by the Cyan guys, the brothers Robin and Rand, and they went on to do the sequel to Myst, Riven, which I worked on. But they were Mac guys. They were Mac developers. But Myst was also shipped on the PC. So it had huge success on both Mac and PC. When Steve Jobs came back in '98, he decided that Mac should actually be friendly to game developers. So in '99, he was making a push to show, look, game developers, you can do really great looking graphics and have a great platform to ship on.
I see. It all makes sense now. Okay, I see.
We were developing Halo to be cross-platform. Halo was going to be, just like all Bungie titles, was going to ship on the PC and the Mac. But Steve was the first one to get to us and say, I want to premiere your game on a Mac running with OpenGL. I think it was the engine that was driving the graphics. So we knew it was going to look really cool, but at that point we had been doing all of this proof of concept development on the PC. All our tools were PC, all of our stuff was PC. We hadn't ported anything or worked on any Macs yet. So there was a scramble to get a visual, real-time, real demo that would play on a Mac, but there was no time to also implement audio on the Mac. So we had literally like 4 or 5 days to put this thing together. So I went to Alex Soropian, who was the owner of Bungie at the time in Chicago. And at that point, I was still a contractor. My company, I had my own studio, and everything I did with Bungie was as a contractor. And so he said, well, we need to do this show, and we don't have audio. What do you think we should do? And I said, look, give me enough budget to just do music, and it'll be a music plus visuals only, music only. I'll put the music track, I'll record it, put it on a CD. Somebody's going to have to press play on the CD at the same time that Jason Jones goes out and hits the space bar on a scripted
I so remember those
demo.
days. Yeah.
And so we crossing our fingers that it somehow feels like it syncs up. Now, as well as I do, George, or Jeebs,
That's all right.
that the best laid plans of composers and men is that we can throw music at a scene and work to compose and make sure we hit all these sync points, and we do all this stuff, and we're very meticulous about scoring a scene. And then an editor slaps it up and they're, a second off or 10 frames off or whatever it is. And you're about to say something and then you go, well, actually, that works pretty good.
Right,
it's hitting other things differently. So I've always told young composers, when somebody goes, oh, I just love the way you hit that moment where the girl looks into the guy's eyes and you do this thing. And then you go, I didn't do anything. But don't ever admit that.
No,
always take credit.
Thank you. Worked forever on that. I did forever.
Yes. Of course, I planned that moment with the horns and the strings swelling. Yeah. Sometimes you're just doing stuff that sounds good and is musical and it feels nice, but it's going to line up. So I knew that the soft sync of hitting play and hitting the spacebar simultaneously, if I did my work right, enough things would seem like they were intended to get away with that show.
Sure.
But the thing I said to Alex at the time was like, look, we have to do this the right way. It's a captive audience. It's dark. It's a big moment. It's a huge screen. You know, we can play, you know, really well recorded music on giant speakers in this hall. We will capture the audience, but we can't chintz out. So give me a budget to hire, you know, musicians to really do this thing right. So we did. I said, look, I'll own the piece and license its use to this moment in time. Yeah. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's the jingle world. That's that other world talking back there.
Exactly. And then, you know, just pay the expenses, pay for the studio, pay for the musicians. And at the time, we hired 3 singers besides me and Mike. So we had 5 male singers total. And these 3 singers was a habit I was into for things like Mr. Clean. We would hire, at the time, Group 3, it was called. The SAG contract was Group 3, and then we could mult them and have them sing on top of themselves multiple times. So Group 3 multed was a standard thing that we did. So I hired Group 3 multed and 6 string players, 4 violins, 2 cellos. And then the rest of it was synths and samples and then tricks in the recording studio. And so even the strings, of course, they were multed also. At the time, we could, you know, have the string players switch parts and overdub and, okay, first violins only, everybody play first violin, everybody play now second violin. We would do all that stuff.
Were you doing that over stems? I mean, you had like, did you blend in a little bit of that?
Yes, we brought in stems to begin with. So
I got it.
We had a weekend to write it.
Wow,
I remember coming in. We came in on a Saturday. I came in on a Saturday morning, and by the way, the other thing was our studio had burned down a couple months before. So now
I saw something about that. Yeah,
we were actually back in Mike's basement, in a different house, and we were doing stems there. But then we were going to go to another recording studio to do the live musicians and the final mix.
That sounds so Boston. I'm sorry, but that sounds so Boston. You know how Boston started, right? In the 70s.
Oh, no, really? Is that what they did?
They started in the basement, and they did everything in the basement and then did stuff in Los Angeles, but it was all done in a basement in Boston. So the basement recording era is you know, I'm sorry, continue. I had to throw that in.
I'm very for it. I like everybody can do that now, or in your bedroom, right, or whatever, or a spare bedroom. There you go.
Yeah, I only have this backdrop. This is a backdrop courtesy of Kirkland Sheets.
Okay.
Because on the other side are my ventriloquist puppets and all kinds of stuff.
Oh,
so it's like
fun. Okay.
Anyhow, continue. I was just.
Well, anyway, I was driving over to Mike's studio, and I'm like, okay, we got to come up with something. We have to do I'd already scheduled the string players and the singers to come in on Monday, and this is Saturday. And we had nothing, but we had done. We had worked on jingles enough that I knew we'll pull something out. I had asked my friend Joe Staten, who was one of the writers or the main writer at Bungie. I just said, and I knew the game well because I'd already done the rocket launcher and the Jeeps and everything else. But I'm asking him, describe to me what this demo is going to be. So Bungie is feverishly working on scripting a demo with custom animations and all of this stuff. And they're working on it that weekend. I have no idea what it is. So Joe sort of walks me through the storyboard of what he thinks this gameplay thing is going to do. And he's describing it to me. And I said, well, how long is it going to be? And he goes, well, we think it's going to be 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm like...
That's a pretty big zone to cover, we think. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, of course, I'm patient. I understand. I said 2 or 3. Can you narrow it down at all? Because that's that's very different. And he's like, and I also had worked with Bungie enough to know that if anything, they were going to be on the long side. So he said it was probably going to be closer to 3. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a 3-minute long piece. I know it starts kind of mysterious and it ends kind of mysterious, and it's going to have a lot of action in the middle. So that's the structure, ambient, mysterious, closing in the same way, and then a lot of action in the middle. And so what I thought was, I just need something that I can adjust the two. This needs to be, I think I've used the term smushy. It needs to, the two back end and front end need to be smushy enough that if it's shorter, I can bring it in or do that. I just needed it to be flexible.
Right.
So then I asked him, well, what are we trying to get across here? Like, do you have a vision for the feelings that you want? And this is where the feelings really come in, because I've always been there's a saying I have, which is sound makes it real and music makes you feel.
True.
And so, like when you're doing sound design, you want that sound design to seem so real that people believe it's real. But that is not necessarily where you get the emotions from. You're going to really get the emotions most of the time from the music. So I wanted to know what the feel of this demo would be. And he said, he says, we need to make people feel ancient, epic, and mysterious. I'm like, love it. Thank you. 3 words, ancient, epic, mysterious. And as I'm driving over to Mike's studio, I'm like, okay, well, ancient. What is that? It's Gregorian chant monks. Like as soon as you hear echoey Gregorian chant monks, you know it's ancient.
Yeah.
So because I had 20 minutes to drive over there, I thought I'll write the music. I'll write that monk melody first. So that's what I did. So I wrote that melody in the car, and I've gone through this in some other talks, but the main thing was just I needed it to be hooky. Because I thought if there's a good melodic hook that gets associated with Halo, maybe it'll have some legs. So I know.
Well, I loved that kind of Dorian wide intervallic kind of composition of what the monks were doing. Yeah. That to me was fire. When I listened to it, and
well, you're going to laugh at this, but I had done a lot of study of what I consider to be good melodies and trying to figure out why they're good. And so as I'm in the car, first thing I'm like, okay, well, Dorian is a great, immediately it's the right kind of chant scale. So I'm like, I chose Dorian. And then I thought, okay, what's a really good melody that I've studied? Okay, yesterday, da 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 da. Okay, then I'm going to do Dorian, da 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 da.
Standing on the shoulder of giants, I see.
Yes, it's not. I'm not copying the McCartney melody, but I'm saying what's good about yesterday is these 4 phrases. There's only one high point. There's one low point. They're sort of irregular phrases, and so I just like da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. So
that's the show, folks. There we go.
That's the show. There it is. And it doesn't map to the McCartney melody, but it's like I took the principles behind it. 4 phrases, high point, low point, Dorian, and knew that da 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 da. That's a hook. That's a hook, everybody. Mm-hmm. And da 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 da. That's the highest note I ever hit. Never hit it again. So it's like there are technical things I know can make melodies memorable and singable. And so I came in, said, Mike, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do like Gregorian chant monks at the beginning, and then percussion and chugging cellos for the action, and then back to the Gregorian chant monks. And here's the melody. And Mike's like, yeah, okay, let's go. Let's do it. So that's how that went. And we did it and played it for him on Monday. And then that's what was shown at the show.
But I mean, more than that, though, by the time you guys showed up to deliver on Monday, you guys already put in like the storm drums, the marcato or spiccato kind of strings and all that.
Right. No, we had that rest of that day, Saturday, I started by using sampled voices and getting the voice sort of feeling the way I wanted it, and some sort of smushy, backgroundy, ambient things. And then the percussion came in, which was fun because I knew that if the piece needed to be longer or shorter, the percussion could fade in here or it could fade in here, and we could make things shorter or longer, but the chunks were going to be that. So then we came up with the chicka-ta-chung, 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 da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, all that stuff. And
all
yeah,
that
we worked
stuff,
that all out.
all that stuff that has such an impact on people. That's what's amazing about this, Marty. I mean, to me, this process of, I've heard of things being written in a day or on a tour bus. Some of the biggest hits maybe happened, a girl breaks up with guy, steps in bubble gum and flips off a cop and gets a ticket, goes to jail, gets murdered in jail. Whatever, the story, it's in a bus, it's on the way, it's a hit tomorrow. But the thing is that, the one of the more powerful things that I love about that composition was the power in arrangement and simplicity. And what I mean by that is that these meticulous arrangements that you have, these counter arrangements to da 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 da, and then you have da 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 da. You have these things that are going on there that don't to me. I didn't feel as a composer that I was missing anything in a larger orchestral vibe as it was when it was more string oriented than the storm drums and these super catchy I'm sorry, I'm goobering like a composer right now because
that's cool.
I'm that kind of string composer. My legacy and my family's legacy, we're string people and stuff. So when it comes to those certain dynamics and those counter arrangements that are these answer back melodies that have just as much as an impact as the core melody. So at any given time, I personally believe for any huge Halo fan out there, that like I just did, I could pull da 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 and boom. Or da 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 da, or da 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 da. These are all these memory triggers, and that to me is a little bit of a glow, I believe, on some of your jingle experience. The power of the hook, the power.
Also, I would say that one of the things, and now we're going to go way back, and you've told me that you had this, heavy metal channel and maybe some prog rock stuff in there. I was of the age where when prog rock happened, I was just junior high coming into freshman year in high school. And as a kid who had taken piano lessons seriously and was kind of serious about music, I was not a huge rock and roller because in my family, that was kind of looked down upon as being just too basic and not necessarily... The performers weren't as good as the jazzers. My dad knew Stan Kenton.
Oh, that conversation.
Yes. So I was a bit of a snob growing up until I heard, it was a combination. I heard Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I also heard Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I was suddenly like, wait, what is this? This is like Emerson, Lake and Palmer just opened my eyes up because I was playing Bartok, right, on the piano. And suddenly I'm hearing Bartok out of this rock band that was like so cool. I'm like, hey, Mom, look at this. And she's like, well, it is sort of interesting. So anyway, I just...
But we will not play that at dinner.
Yeah. But I was consumed by prog rock, and I just thought prog rock was great. And one of the things I liked, one of the bands that I liked that nobody knows, and you probably don't either, we'll see, was a band called Gentle Giant.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I highly recommend you to go down a little Gentle Giant rabbit hole for fun. There's still some rabid fans out there. But the thing I loved the most about Gentle Giant was their counterpoint. They actually wrote contrapuntally. They wrote with melodies in mind and counter melodies in mind. It wasn't about power chords. It wasn't about chord progressions. It was about counterpoint, which nobody, in my opinion, was really, really doing. So my favorite courses at music school were always counterpoint classes, 16th century, 18th century counterpoint, because I just felt like that was a different path into creating music. It wasn't the harmonic progression coming first. It was about melodies coming first. So if there's a bass line, what's a good counter line for a melody? And then what are good inner voices? And the inner voices have to be just as interesting as any of the other voices. And that is a different aesthetic musically, is that every voice, if you take the voice out and just play it by itself, it has to follow the rules of what makes a good melody. Whereas in homophony, which is, we are geeking out now.
We're geeking now. This is it.
Chord progression.
Counter. What was that word? Counterpuntual.
Contrapuntal.
Contrapuntal.
Yes.
It's guys. Listen to that word carefully. It's not what you think he was. What he said. It's counterpoint. It's okay.
Counterpoint. Yes. So if you take chord progressions and harmony, a lot of times what we call homophony, right, is like maybe it's an interesting bass line. Certainly, the most important thing is the melody, and then the chord progression. If you look at the alto line is. It's not an interesting melody.
Right. It's just
It stays the same. So I really enjoyed the idea of like, what if you come at things from a different perspective, and the harmonies that exist, the vertical alignment happens not on purpose. It happens because you're following rules of good melodies. So you can look at something at any point along the way and say, well, that's an interesting harmony. Anyway, that's just one of my aesthetic approaches to composing music. And I brought that into all of my compositions, but certainly the composition for Halo. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be contrapuntal in my approach to what the violas do and what the violins do, as opposed to what the cellos are doing. And that's
but I think one of the magical things about that is the subtleness of the orchestral aspect of the arrangements. So each one of those, to me, each one of those melodies are very out in front. They're not overloaded with larger orchestral support behind it. Is what
right.
And to me, that's what gives the power of your compositions through that. Is that each one of those arrangements spoke out loud and clearly, without having to, let's say. Myself, I've had publishers send me back music because I've gotten so sick with like harmonies and stuff like that, and they go, "Oh, that's just too giant. Wait a second, hang on for a second, and it's got a lot going on. What happened to the melody? Oh, it's right there. Can't you hear it?" And then I go, "Oh no, they can't hear that. That's not their job."
Right.
Their job is to, So that's what I loved about.
Well, there is I think. It maybe with one of the words texture, the texture is a little more transparent, right? It's
that's a good way to put it.
You can, and it's so hard. I always say not by words alone, right? I mean, that was my slogan during my jingle days. Is like the jingle writer guy from the copywriter from the agency would come in and say, here's the words I have, and I would like look at the words. I'm like, okay, well, now we're going to set that to a jingle because. People don't just absorb things through words. Like once you add music to it. So like we're the music people, we're going to make your words better. So, man does not live by words alone. So we're going to put that in. But what that means is also when guys like you and I talk about music, we're talking about something that really only makes sense musically. And so we use words like transparent or texture or, color and all these things, which are really just sort of metaphors for what music actually does. So it's fun to talk, but it's hard for some people who might not know what we mean.
Right, and I think you touched on that.
The words are hard to. It's hard to explain in words what you actually mean musically. So yeah.
Yeah, you touched on that. I think one of the podcasts I listened to is that the ability for a composer to use unique language in order to communicate with people who don't speak our language. I had an instance where I was doing something for Dirt Devil, and it was one of those weird things. I actually wrote the music to a storyboard that they end up letting the music influence now the editing and everything that happened. So what happened was there's this one little thing where the guy goes swinging around a little thing and he lands on something, and I used like a muted trumpet for that kind of a thing. And we get into this big session, and like they do, get into the big session, the big room, you get the fruit, the thing, the pole dancers and whatever you need. And one of the CDs, one of the creative directors said, that thing right there, do we have another option for that? I go, what thing are we talking about? And I was really kind of confused, and I had to kind of drill it down, saying, "Oh, that right there, that's just kind of a muted trumpet. You'd like to hear something else." And I had to go through that process of delineating the fact that they don't know what that instrument is, or the other CD was going, "Is that thing just a little loud to you?" And once again, go through the process. That thing, what is that? Oh, that's a snare drum.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go through. So that was a very important little bit that you said there, and I'm glad that you just brought it back up. Is that communication?
In my jingle days, one of the things I learned was the conversation with people who are not musicians.
Excuse me.
So you have, the people come in. One of the classic ones for me was early, I think probably in our first year or second year of doing jingles. I was sick and Mike had to go. And this is one of those funny things is Mike doesn't have the language. He doesn't have as much, because he's self-taught musically. He didn't have quite as much understanding of certain phrases, that have to do with sort of the educational approach to music. But so I said, hey, you need to go take this meeting with these creative directors. He's like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm like, just take notes, just listen, just be in cell mode. So he came back. I was feeling better. I said, okay, so what's the project? And he says, he goes, yeah, Marty, they really pulled one on me. They said that what they want is a fugue. And I said, they want a fugue? And so my head is like, oh my gosh. So I said, well, do they want a 3-voice fugue or a 4-voice fugue? He goes, I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, well, I better write a 4-voice fugue just to be safe, right?
Yeah, I
actually pulled out all my academia approach to writing music. I wrote a 4-voice fugue. The clients came in, they're listening to it, and they're like, what is this? And I'm like, well, it's a fugue. And they're like, no, that's not a fugue. We want we want one of those fugues. And I'm like, well, this is a fugue. And then the guy says, no, like that thing on the Addams Family. Da-da-da-dun. Da-da-da-dun. Da-da-da-dun.
The harpsichord?
Da-da-da-da. A harpsichord.
Close. I can see how we can make that mistake, Oh, shit.
So I said, so you want a harpsichord? Yeah, whatever, one of those fugue things. I'm like, okay, so I pulled the harpsichord sound out and started playing. Yeah, that's going to be great. So, rewrote it in front of them.
Yeah.
On a harpsichord sound. And so it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, when you're talking to people who know just enough to screw you up, it's really scary.
Well, you get used to it, though. That's the thing. Yes. You get used to it. You know out of experience what to expect, that you go in with kind of a Garfield smile.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just kind of sit there and you have to work. And this is no disrespect to the creative directors and stuff.
Not at all.
They themselves have to go through their own processes in order to communicate through it. So I think all creative professionals have to kind of get out of our own conversation
I'll give a little hint to all the young composers out there. Is the majority of the world is visual. Most people are very visual. And so if you use visual terms when you're talking to people, that will calm them down. And then you as the audio person have to figure out what that means. But when somebody starts describing things to me, I never say, oh, I hear what you might want. I never use audio words. I'll always say, oh, I see what kind of music you want.
That's a good point. I never really would have thought about it like that.
I sort of get your vision for this musically. Yeah, I think I know how this should look musically. I use look and see and vision. I use all that does is it makes the client sort of calm down a little bit. They trust you. And then, of course, I go back to the studio and I'm like, I have no idea what they want.
Well, I want to definitely drift into that like younger composer part of this. But as we get through the Halo experiences, and now you're transitioning from game to game and still keeping the motifs or the the melodies consistent as you're expanding your arrangement into each game. Obviously, the piano is an incredibly important part of your composition not only in the memory trigger, because that was the track that I did also a little bit of in the reaction, but you subsequently, and what little itty bitty experience I have, because I've only reacted to like maybe 4 or 5 or 6, like Elden Ring and Journey, which I believe I heard one of your in one of your podcasts that the Journey composers, your friends or you're acquainted with and stuff.
Yeah,
Wonderful piece of work.
There's a very, very long podcast with Austin Wintory, the composer of Journey, interviewing me. It's like if you have a weekend to kill, you can listen to that one.
That's what I've been getting into. I've been listening to some, because the thing is, what's unique in this journey of which we are now talking about is that how compositions in different video games really cover everything from the Mick Gordon style of heavy death metal or gent metal or a crossover metal EDM to strictly EDM hip hop techno trap stuff to huge orchestral pieces. I think my very first game I listened to was something called, I'm going to get this wrong, everybody. Let me hold up the old man fail card because it's going to come. I think it's Near Automatica or something of that nature. And
I don't know how to pronounce that either, by the way. So yes.
And it was just a massive sound, but as your journey as a composer through the Halo series, went all the way. What was the name of the last game that you did for them?
Well, I worked on Destiny, and if you want to hear a nice orchestral suite with pretty stinking big orchestra, look for Music of the Spheres. So I did.
That's one of yours, I take it.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Forgive me. That's what I love about not knowing anything, because we can fill in all the pukas. Puka here in Hawaii is holes. Sorry.
Okay.
So sorry. Yeah. Really quick. What you've paid homage to Michael, your partner, as a composer and a contributor and stuff, but I also heard you say that you never wrote in the same room. So were you guys you'd write something and then send it to him and he'd add a little something, or how did that work?
No, actually, going back to our commercial film days in Chicago, we were always in the same room, almost always. So. There would be times, depending on who sort of had the initial idea, Mike would be sitting someplace with the guitar. I'd be laying on the couch saying, oh, yeah, let's do, okay, lay that down. We'll start with that.
Sure.
Or I'd be at the keyboard. More often than not, I'd be sitting at a keyboard and Mike's laying on the couch. And he would say, oh, yeah, wait, what you just did, go back 30 to 10 seconds. That was really good. So we were collaborating constantly. We got into habits of how we collaborated. So we actually knew how each other thought. We knew how each other approached music and complimented each other really well. I think Mike said something one time in an interview that I'll never forget, because this is after decades of us working together. Somebody asked the question. It was one of the few times he and I were together being interviewed, especially after we had split up, him staying in Chicago and me going to Seattle. But he just said, I think I make Marty's music more accessible and he makes my music more interesting.
Oh, I like that.
Like, wow, I think that was like the perfect way to put it.
And very respectful to each other's talents with that statement as well.
Yeah. And it was like exactly right. So what I love about the thing that you did your reaction video to is you actually hit on two of the pieces that are really well known for Halo. And one is
come on, Marty, you wrote it.
One final effort. I'm doing the old man thing, which, gung, 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 and the piano and the big thing and the whole thing. And that was essentially, that was almost entirely my composition. And Mike came in and worked on it sort of with me. But by that point, he was in Chicago and I was in Seattle. So that's when we had to
I see.
not be in the same room. It was only just because geographically we couldn't, but we still knew each other well enough that we could trade ideas and stems and stuff back and forth. And, he would send me something and I'd work on something he had started. I would send him something and he'd work on something I had started.
Oh, good. Cool.
Yeah. And so what's also funny is that you did I think Never Forget.
Yes, that's the one. I'm sorry, Marty. Out of everything.
No, that's okay. But what I like about that,
and
I have to give Mike credit every time that comes up, because that's essentially Mike's piece. That was a piece that it started as a piece called it just started as one of the pieces that in this transfer back and forth during Halo 2. And I would get a big pile of stuff for Mike, and I would send him a big pile. We were working back and forth. And he had this relatively simple piece. And I thought, well, I don't know where this is going to go. There's no place in the game that I can put this, but it's a great piece. So I took it into the studio with string players and had them play the strings. I replayed the piano, but it was essentially Mike's piece. And I remember talking to him like, where did this piece come from? And he goes, well, you know how it is. Every once in a while, he says, I'm sitting there with my guitar and I'm like, wait a minute, what would Marty do? So he would put himself like, what would Marty do? He'd go over to the piano and play some heartfelt thing on the piano. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like something I should have done. I'm like mad at you for doing that piece. It's so good. So, I was happy to actually produce it up and, get all the strings and the horn and the stuff on there and have live players. And then, months go by and I'm implementing stuff into the game. And like I thought there was no place in the game for that particular piece. And I think I came across it. I came across the recording. And this is going to probably kind of blow your mind. But when you're working on a game for 2-3 years, you will actually forget some of the things you've made.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that happening. Yeah.
So I came across this piece that was fully produced, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to put that someplace. And I forget if it went into a menu screen or I went someplace. And then when we started working on the soundtrack, and the soundtrack always comes after you've done all the music for the game and implemented all the music in the game. And the soundtrack is a separate entity. So you're trying to put all the best stuff into a soundtrack. And I had to put that piece on the soundtrack because it was so good. But I didn't have a name for it. But the sort of joke was that I had forgotten about it. So I called it Unforgotten because I found it again.
Wow.
And then we did another version of it later on, and we called that one Never Forget. And what's amazing is like, and I hate to almost minimize or, talk about the naming on that as though it doesn't have meaning. It did. It had sort of an in-joke meaning, but it has taken on its own life since then. And, somebody came up to me one time and talked about, oh, I just love Never Forget. I used to play this game with my friend and we always stopped and listened to that. And it means so much to me. And then he died of cancer and we played it at his funeral. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Now, am I going to tell him the story of how the stupid way I came up with the name? No, it's like for him, that piece is talking about never forgetting his friend. It has way deeper meaning than I ever anticipated. And that's the magic to me of music. You make music, whatever reason you're making it for, and then you throw it out and the public has it, and then it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, and
we have to respect that.
Yeah, and we've heard those stories from artists, singers and bands and stuff like that, how they wrote this thing, and then all of a sudden to the listener and to their theater of the mind and their emotional setting at the first time that they listen, and it becomes embedded into the soundtrack of their life. Yep. That's what that means. I don't know if I know you're really busy, but I don't know if you had the opportunity to read some of the comments on that video that I did, where there are exactly stories, emotional stories of like this was our wedding thing. This was, when my kids used to hang out, or a sad one where, I used to play with my dad all the time. He passed away. Every time I hear this song, how many tears that it evokes of emotion. And that's what I believe us as the sonic pharmacists get the opportunity to do, and it's an honor for me. It's a complete joy, and it's an honor. But that particular track, though, you have so many incredible little melodic moments throughout all of the journey process. I mean, all of the Halos process. There was just something on how you orchestrated, and did you hear me talk about the dynamics? Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
About the swelling of the strings and how it talks to you, how it talks to your soul and your soul that way, or your heart and your spirit that way, and how that has to do with those subtle uses of dynamics and orchestrating a piece of work and getting the horns, the French horns, to kind of embrace you and bring you through it. It's just amazing that track. And, you know, thank you very much, Michael Salvatori, as well for that, please.
Absolutely,
and for sure.
Yes.
Has such an emotional callback to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people around the world.
Yeah. And, you know, the opportunity we have to put those things into a project like Halo, which has this huge following and continues to have so many, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of fans. I mean, it's just such an honor, because you know how it is. You could be writing a really nice piece of music that maybe would touch a lot of people, but it's only going to be heard in this little tiny space. Mm-hmm. If you can find this other vehicle to present that to, you know, hundreds or millions of fans, it's such an honor. I mean, it's just like, we didn't realize it at the time, especially with Halo 1 in 2001. I mean, we really were hoping that, you know, work, make something cool. If we're successful, people will love this game, and they'll be playing it even 6 months from now. And maybe we'll sell 800,000 units, which was like, whoa.
Such humble thoughts, you know?
Yeah, but like, if we could do that, just think about it, you know? And, you know, or me writing the writing that melody in the car in 1999, it was... you know, a panic. I know what I need to do. Let's get this going. Maybe this melody will stick for a few weeks, right? I mean, the idea that I can talk about that melody and it means something to people 23 years later is mind-boggling. If you knew that, that would probably cause you to just stop.
Yeah, it probably would have.
I don't have the ability to write something that's memorable like that. You have to be just like, I just need to write something for this thing, and it's got to be good, and it's got to be emotional.
Yeah.
And then you're like, wow, 23 years go by, and people still like it. It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's a gift for us composers to have something like that happen.
As well is that if you knew that there was going to be some sort of success, it would be intimidating, anxiety lit, because everybody knows at the very end, what did you call it? The crunch period? The crunch period?
Crunch.
The crunch period, you know, how that could be. But I think another thing that I want to touch on that is super genius about composing music to video games, you yourself and all the composers who are contributing, this is the only creative form of which a piece of music constantly is repeating yourself as you're graduating into campaign. So if you've got to take 50 or 200 or 500 hours in a campaign to get through it, and you have sound design and music, that keeps on just pounding into your soundtrack of life, and automatically that does live in that term, soundtrack of life. And it's so unique, because unless you watch, you know, like I love the music from Forrest Gump. I've watched that film 50 times, but that still pales in comparison to somebody who's going through a campaign and listening to that same background music that's just lightly going on with sound design. And I think it's absolutely tremendous. And it's...
Well, let me just comment on that real quick, because my philosophy of game music turns out to be different than many, many, many other game developers.
Excuse me.
Some game developers absolutely want the wall-to-wall music. Like, as long as you're playing the game, there's going to be music playing. I don't like that. I feel like music becomes wallpaper. It loses its impact. So if you actually play through the Halo games that I made and you listen to the music tracks, they usually come in at certain points, they change at certain points, they end at certain points, and then there's no music. It's just sound design. So that way the music actually has more emotional impact, because it's not constantly going, and then you have to figure out a way to ramp it up or ramp it down. It has a purpose. Just like if you think about the old, you know, the first Hollywood movies that actually had sound, they were used to having somebody in the theater during the quote unquote silent film days, which were never silent. Because if you went to a silent film at a theater, there was at least a piano player sitting there playing the entire time.
Yeah.
Or an organist. Or sometimes they had pit orchestras that had scores for that movie. But the habit was, because there was no dialogue or sound effects, music was playing constantly, wall to wall. And in some of the early films, you will hear music that never stops. Music cues everything. And I don't think that's necessarily, that's not my personal aesthetic for how I like to approach. I feel like music starts to lose its power if it's always playing. So I also had, even when I would have a piece of music that maybe was worth 2.5 minutes of cool content, and I would implement it in a way where it could loop enough to cover 7-8 minutes of action or whatever. I was always looking at, like, look, unless the person is stuck and can't make progress, I don't want to torture them by having an infinite loop.
Right,
of music.
sure, right.
So I would have what called the board now switch, which would, and it was unique for every piece of music or every implemented piece of music, it would figure out a way to end it based on how much time had been gone by. So if you never got to the places where you triggered the cool middle section or the return or the ending, if you just were stuck, eventually the music would just stop, because it was like, you're bored. Like, I don't want to bore people with the music.
Sure.
So it would be the board now switch. You've been here too long, we're going to turn it off. So now there are other games that do not do that. Lots of other games that don't do that, especially some of the earliest approaches, like the Nintendo games. They didn't have very good sound design. They didn't have good dialogue. They just couldn't. Technically, they couldn't. But they could do a level music. So when you're on this level, this is the looping piece of music you hear.
Right.
And some of that stuff really, really does get into your head, because
Mario Brothers. Hey, come
absolutely.
On. You know,
absolutely.
What an incredible piece. So musically, what an incredible
absolutely,
piece.
I agree. But I just feel like that is one of the things that games can do, but you don't have to do that. But the thing is, like you said, people will go back and play Halo over and over and over and over. So they do end up hearing these pieces of music over and over and over and over, more than you might hear when you watch it.
Where was Never Forget positioned in the game? Forgive me, I can't.
Oh, see, that's the thing.
So was that a menu? Because that's something that I'm learning on this journey, because I have no idea that there's music that's just created for menus, or when they build the body parts or put on the stuff. What did Never Forget have its own life?
Yeah,
position?
Never Forget never made it into any of. I wrote because when you're working on music, especially for a movie or anything, you're like, well, there's going to be the action stuff, there's going to be the scary stuff, there's going to be the love theme, you kind of know you need to cover some of these areas before anybody asks for it. So I actually wrote a piece called Halo Love Theme, which never shows up anyplace other than videos that I'll make, nostalgic videos. I'll just throw that in because it's sort of a fun rendition on the piano. But what I tended to do, what I actually did with all the Halos, is one of the last things you put together is, okay, what is the menu going to look like? How does the menu flow? And what are you going to be hearing during the menu? So the menu was almost like if you go to an opera and you're sitting in the audience, before the curtain opens, you're hearing an overture. And the overture will be sort of the highlight reel of all the themes that you are going to hear when you watch the opera. So the overture, even though it's the first piece ever heard, is probably the last piece ever composed, because the overture is being composed from themes that are already in the opera.
Right, right.
So I always looked at the menu as like the overture. So I would take my favorite moments that had different emotional meanings from the game, and I would put them together as part of the menu. So the first thing the player does when they, put the game in and they start hearing the menu music, they're hearing things that I know they're going to experience in the game.
Oh, I see.
And that was the funny thing about that was for Unforgotten and Never Forget, because it never existed in the game anyplace. It still was a strong enough piece that I thought, I got to get it in the menu, and it's That's why that's the only place it shows up in Halo.
Ah, I see. So it is a menu thing. So, because this is one of the things I remember doing when I would listen to it, or when I was playing and I'd take a break, like you do. You got to eat and you got to go to the bathroom or whatever. When you're so entrenched in play, that it would stop on a menu or stop on something, and that piece would kind of cycle or something. It's
well, the menu pieces were what I did with the menu is. And this is what I did with all 5 games, is there would be sort of the hook that would start at the beginning. It would be like a 15, 20-second long thing that would always be the first thing you hear in the menu. And then there would be a list of 8 or 6 or 8 other pieces that could come in after that, but they would come in random order.
Oh, I
so
see.
you would never hear them. You would never sit at the menu and hear the same pieces in the same order over and over again. So that, for me, it was just to keep it a little bit more interesting. So you couldn't anticipate what the next piece would be. And I got to tell you, I know this is your old man memory, which I completely understand. That melody for Never Forget did not show up any place in Halo 1, including the menu. So if all you played was Halo 1, you wouldn't have ever heard that piece unless you played Halo 2. So
was it? See, I'm out of.
But there were other similar kind of feels in the Halo 1 menu.
Maybe that's it,
things.
because I know that my daughters bought me like another iteration. Reach, I think was the name.
Yeah,
of one
Reach. Yeah, that was the last one we did.
So I think I went from Halo 1 and achieved everything all the way. For some reason, I went all the way to Reach, because I just wasn't like that guy that bought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way through. Because at that point, you're a dad, you got kids, and plus I'm writing music and doing my life. But then they dropped Reach on me for my birthday, and there was also an obvious transition in the sound of your compositions. I mean, bolder, stronger, and then of course newer melodic arrangements and stuff of that nature. So I do have a gap in the games from my own memory, but for me, I just circled back to the fact that I'd be making a cheese sandwich or whatever, and I would just actually let that menu play. I didn't stop the game. I was figuring, this is super cool music. Kind of kept me in the vibe for 20 minutes while I took a break and all that. And it just, to me, it was just such an attractive piece of work that I just didn't feel like turning it off. So I mean that. Yeah. Well, that whole thing is I'm goobering over it again, but that was what it was.
But what I like to, the thing is, entertainment. As people who create entertainment. What we are trying to get is people's time. It's like, yeah, you could go to a baseball game, or you could go to the movies, or you could watch a TV show, or you could play a game. What are you going to do with your time? And I never wanted to give people the excuse of like, yeah, I'm done with this game. So like that was a Bungie design philosophy too. So you would say there were a lot of games where you would die, and it would go to a death screen. And then there would be a thing. Do you want to keep playing? Yes, no. And we were like, we're not going to give people the option of saying no. We don't want people we don't automatically give people this option of quitting the game. Like they're going to have to decide, I'm done playing this game, I'm going to quit. We didn't ever want to give them a choice. So when you die in Halo, there's no death screen. You just are immediately back at the last checkpoint. So you don't have the choice of stopping. Now, if you're not an insane person, you might say, gee, I've been playing for long enough. My eyes are watering. I'm going to go outside and play baseball. And I encourage that.
Right.
We want to be the ones that give you the choice. And it was the same thing with the menu. I would tell the guys that I'm working with, like, look, this menu, you guys don't understand this, but players are going to, if we give them a boring menu screen with boring music, it will be a reason to turn off the game. So I don't want to ever give someone the reason to stop. If they're going to go make a cheese sandwich, great, go make a cheese sandwich. But we're gonna just keep tickling your emotions. So I think I'm going to go back now and play again. So exactly.
Worked on me. There you go. There was an unprompted, response to that research on how things work, and it did. It did. I just listened to it and stuff, and it was just very attractive. But And very hooky. That's the thing. Like I've said before, your works and Michael's works, very hooky. So that, that sticky memory kind of things, those sticky melodic things, hensing back to the jingle kind of world, really,
This will be repeated from other things that I've talked about, but I like to call that emotional equity. So whatever the emotions that the player has when they first experience a piece of music, that has equity. It's like money in the bank. It's like, I know that if I bring some version of that melody back, I'm going to be tickling that emotional, bank account that you already have going. So the reason you don't just through compose, the reason you don't just keep doing new music all the way is because if you do that, you can still like, this is exciting, this is scary, this is exciting, this is scary. But if the third time you do a scary thing, it has a little remnant or variation on the first scary thing you did. Now it all sounds like it's one, organic whole. And the emotions you had the first time you were scared, now you are remembering viscerally some of those emotions. So I use the term emotional equity.
That's
it
great.
Also makes it easier. It makes it easier to compose because you're like, well, wait, that was a good theme. I'm going to do a variation on that theme. So,
yeah, I'll do a callback. I'll start off with the cello for the first few notes, and then I'll have horns kind of reflect this other part of the melody, and you combine it, and you have something. Yeah. So now, speaking of the world of composers and video games and stuff like that, technology's changed quite a bit since your very first, writing of the Halo. Well, definitely since your very first video game, but now with all the technology and all the modules and stuff like that, and composers coming up to bat by the thousands that are really qualified to do things, and now it's that really hard to get the gig thing. There has been a kind of rush of energy of things that happen between the relationship between composers and game developer, what do you call them, the devs or whatever, and or corporations or what have you. And I think
there's developers and publishers. Those are the on the business side. That's the developers are usually the group that creates the actual game, and the publishers are usually the ones who do the marketing and distribution and publishing of a game.
Okay.
And so the creative people are usually on the dev team or even outside contractors.
And that's the visual, right? The gaming physics and all that sort of stuff.
It could be, well, physics, art, animation, writing, all of that stuff, yeah.
So it just seems to be that there's, because I'm new to this whole energy, I came across a video from one of my favorite heavy metal guys, a guy named Nick Nocturnal, who did this whole thing on a composer by the name of Mick Gordon having some conflicts. And so I really watched it through and through and realized it was a long presentation he did, but it was very thorough. And then I realized that it harkens back to still some of the things I've kind of gone through in my past and in other situations. Yeah. And I know that you've also had, we've all had our challenges. This should be this, that, where, how come this doesn't show up? Why am I not getting paid for this? We talked about previously about my thing that I had to go through as well. But the Mick Gordon one seems to right now be taking a lot of the exposure of what's happening here. Are you a little familiar with what's been going on in that conversation?
Yeah, I'm I would say very familiar. I've reached out to Mick. He and I are in contact. I'm in contact with some other people. I know a lot of people who are composers in the game industry, and here's how this goes. We started out in the game industry as contractors, so we would be hired by, in this particular case, Bungie, and we would contract to do music and audio. Then I became an in-house guy, and I became the audio director who worked for Bungie. Then we all got bought by Microsoft, and now I'm a Microsoft employee doing Halo 1, 2, 3, ODST, and Reach, although Bungie sort of bought themselves back before Halo 3. So we did 3 ODST and Reach as the developers Bungie, which were now independent again, for Microsoft, the publisher. Anyway, that's more detail than you need. But during that, 10, 15 year period, I was in-house. Mike, on the other hand, was still O'Donnell Salvatori, that company never stopped in Chicago. And he was essentially, I was hiring Mike during that period as a contractor. So I know what it's like to be a contractor. I know what it's like to be in-house composer, and I know what it's like to be the person as audio director who's hiring outside composers. Mick, I believe, has always been a contractor. So the majority of the way music is done for most titles is there's the in-house team, and it seems like lately, or the last 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, what most games do is they have producers and audio leads and audio directors, and then when it comes to music, they'll hire an outside talent or outside contractor. Sometimes two. Sometimes they'll hire two different composers. And those people are usually outside contracts. They're not part of the team. They're not inside. They essentially, have meetings and are instructed, and maybe they have builds, or maybe they have art, concept art, and they do stuff based on those instructions. And they write and produce music, throw it over the wall, and see what sticks. They'll see what the client accepts, what the client rejects. And to me, I feel like it's not an ideal situation, and it leads to some of the problems that we're seeing today with a few of the composers who are more public about some of the conflicts and controversy that's going on. It's really, to me, it's super unfortunate. But of course, who am I to talk? I was an in-house guy for so long, and I still ended up with a huge pile of conflicts and controversies. And I've been through many iterations of legal problems, including arbitration and lawsuits and everything else. So I've become an expert in other areas that I never thought I'd be an expert in. So
by trial and error,
yes, by trial and error,
kind of
and by not necessarily something I would recommend, by the way, to anybody. If you can avoid legal entanglements, if you can avoid a lawsuit, you should avoid it at all costs.
Sure.
So I'm going to just say my opinion right now about the Mick Gordon situation. Unbelievably talented, just amazing guy, composer, talent, just up off the wall. Something happened a couple of years ago, and when I saw that he basically, when somebody said, "Hey, this soundtrack that we got doesn't sound very good, and we're looking at the waveforms, and there's pops and clicks and bad edits," and Mick just responded by saying, "Of course he would say this. Like, as a composer, how could you avoid it? You say, I didn't do that. Somebody else did that. My name's on it, but what you're complaining about wasn't something I got to do." And that's all he said. He basically just said, I wasn't the one, I wasn't allowed to be the one actually finishing that soundtrack. And so he said that out loud.
That's bizarre.
Which, by the way, reminds me of something that happened 10 years ago when we showed Destiny to the world for the first time. And up to that point, anything Bungie had ever done, every trailer, everything we ever did, was a Bungie product. Bungie made it. We wrote it, we sound designed it, we artistically created it, and there was music that we did. At that moment, at a presentation of Destiny, there was an official gameplay trailer, and everybody thought it was done by Bungie. And I had already been fighting about this behind the scenes. And I remember saying, if anybody asks me if they can have the music to this, I'm going to have to tell them I didn't do the music. This was not done by Bungie. As a matter of fact, the music was library music that was used in Thor. Jeebs, maybe it was your music.
No. I would have remembered that. None of my music, it's been heard around the world many times, but never made it into the gaming world. So sorry, man, not me.
Yeah, but it was music that was it was already being heard
Sure.
in a Thor trailer, and now it was being part of this Destiny trailer. I was incensed that was happening, and probably against my better judgment, somebody asked me, can we have a copy of that music? And I said, I'm glad you like the thing, but this was not produced by Bungie. It was produced by Activision. And that began the slow slide into me eventually being fired, because I said something publicly that you just don't say.
And that's funny you should say that too, because I want to jump right into that aspect of it, the public thing. Now, the world of we are live always on the internet. You know, I have a saying, you know, once you post, forever toast. And,
exactly.
And you know, and that has many iterations, as we all know. But one of the things that you said earlier was the fact that it went public, which is something we wouldn't have heard of 25 years ago, because there was no such thing as going public, unless, you know, you had a little indie rag you were able to get an article in that only a few people would read. But now pulling in the drama of going public, once again, I don't know anything about the relationship between the gentleman that posted something on Reddit a couple years ago, and then I will say one thing about...
That's a guy named Marty Stratton, who is the studio head. He is head of id Studios. So he was not just sort of one of the devs who just happened to take offense at what Mick said. He did a full-blown public... but
to me, that's just so
public
unheard
response
of.
In a way that I thought was unusually mean-spirited, frankly. Maybe he felt like he was protecting his team. I don't know what, but he really went after Mick for saying the truth, which was, I didn't produce that. If you don't like it, don't talk to me. Somebody else did it. You know, maybe Mick could have said those things publicly in a different way, but from what I now have read in Mick's response, Mick was spending a lot of time behind the scenes trying to rectify a whole bunch of stuff. So,
but this public back and forth thing, though, this is the thing that, to me, it brings a different kind of energy, because, as you all know, the world that we're in right now, you have these, you know, keyboard anarchists or whatever that were actually threatening both sides, you know, in Twitter or TikTok or whatever, on the internet, the social media sites, you know, and it's almost like a social trial before truth. And just for me on the outside, you know, that guy, Martin, did you say his name was?
It's actually Marty. It's Marty. Straighten, I think.
Yeah, so he comes out first and gives Mick the people's elbow, kind of like it felt like it was a preemptive thing, like you said, maybe to get out ahead of something that was about to boil over. And then Mick spends a couple of years trying to rectify it, and then he releases this thing that just mile long, and you know, for me, where I feel personally like, oh shit, I know this, is when you do get these. What did you call it again? Crush time? Crunch, yeah. These crunch elements of, like, we're at the end. Now we need not only this. Oh, by the way, we need the export of all the stems. Oh, by the way, we need a reduced mix. Oh, by the way, we need all these things. And I think everybody on the creative levels, you could be a colorist, you know, craft food service. I don't know. When it comes towards the very end, everybody goes under that. But the visceral heaviness of that battle unfolding on social media, to me, is like I got to step back and go paddle out or go, you know, get in the water and just surf or something, because it's hard to hear the hardship being played out on public. And then you have the super elitists, like we have gaming elitists. In my case, I've been, you know, targeted a few times by, like, the hardcore heavy metal elitists on my other channel, because let's say I put in, I don't know, a band that's not as, you know, they've been nice to me, but it's a unique world out there to say something, and you go, wow, so I don't like oranges. So you don't like oranges? You must really hate bananas. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
no.
Rush is not heavy metal. Do you not know anything?
You've been there, you've seen it. That's what I guess sometimes.
I'm just assuming. Assuming that you, like.
But okay, it's absolutely, it's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking to see Mick going through what he's going through. It's revealing, at least I could say what it is. It's revealing at what the EMT level of a creative, you know, might. And that's also based on personality. The one thing I hope doesn't happen with this back and forth is it doesn't saddle the video game industry at large with, oh, this is how you treat your people, to the public's view. That there are gaming companies out there, or indie companies and stuff, that treat everybody fairly and are very considerate to the creative process. And to me, that's like going, oh shit, I think this might be more damage control or crisis management control that the industry might have to kind of throw their hat in and say, now, wait a second, we're not Hall. This is not how we treat our composers, but
Right.
there is...
So, let me just, I will announce.
I'm sorry, the
this
coffee
here
just
on your
kicked in.
show. No. I'm at an age and also at a financial place where I am basically semi-retired from the game industry. I don't need to do games. I don't need to have this work in my life anymore. I'm not saying it's a never thing. I'm not saying I'll never go back to it, but I don't need to. So I don't need to work in this industry. I still care a lot about this industry, and I have some ideas about how to try to work with everybody to make it a more fair place. And I think you are right that if the public gets the idea that working in the game industry is bad and unfair, that is going to be really an unfortunate consequence of some of these things. So I'm still very interested in trying to help fix that. But let me just talk in some generalities just for a second. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll find this kind of across the board. But I'm going to just talk about my experience in entertainment in general. People who are creative, artists, actors, singers, musicians, composers, developers who are game designers, what you name it, people who are storyboard artists. There's so many different creative people. They usually come from this creative position in their life where they do things out of the passion for creating. They listen to their internal passions and they are so glad that they can create something mm-hmm. and have people appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Usually it comes along with, oh, and I get to get paid too.
Right.
Especially when you're young.
Right, sure.
You're like, wow, I get to do this thing I love to do and eat a peanut butter sandwich at the same time.
And pay rent, so and keep my phone on and all the other things, yeah.
Now, on the other side, there are these business types. And what I have experienced, and these are generalities, this is not me pointing fingers at any individuals, but the generality is that business type people who are really good at business, they're motivated by accumulating money and power. Usually the passion side is not, it's like it's two different personality types. But those two personality types basically have to work together in order to make things that people want to be entertained by. So but I think I will always give the benefit of the doubt because of who I am to the creative, because I know the creative person is usually working out of just a sense of passion. And the person who is, telling their side, and I know that they're basically coming from a position of money and power, I tend to be like, oh, okay, well, let me think about that. But, contracts are important, and contracts are not so you remain friends.
Yeah, no, that's the dark of it. Yeah.
Contracts are for the judge. Essentially, a contract is written so that a judge at some point determines what is right and fair. If you write a contract and you never have to refer to the contract, that is ideal. Contracts are for the dispute that could happen. You don't write a contract because you're friends and you're just going to get along and everything works out peachy keen. You don't need a contract if that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing something that's a business-oriented thing, you better have a contract because that's the only thing you can fall back on when a dispute happens. And what you are hoping is that there are no disputes, that everything goes just wonderfully. So right now I'm seeing some public conflict in the game industry, and I think it's damaging, and I hope that I can help somewhere behind the scenes or in some way to believe it or not, to restore the reputation of the game industry as a whole, that it is a fair place, it is a good place to work, because if that's what if the game industry has that reputation, it will make more money. So the thing is,
Yeah, no, there is.
for those
True.
who do
Yeah.
want to think about the bottom line, it's like, yeah, well, treat your creatives fairly and your bottom line will go up. It will increase. You start doing some unfair things or perceived unfair things, it could hurt your bottom line, because here's something I've learned in business for years, is that confused people don't buy. So you want people not to feel like there's conflict and they're confused about who's good and who's bad. Confused people don't buy things. They'll buy something that they're not confused about. They'll go to the competitor because they feel like the competitor is not confusing. So you don't want to cause public confusion and disjointed, this isn't fair, this isn't good, this guy's bad, this guy's bad. You don't want that out there, because people won't buy. They'll stop buying these things. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
that needs
tough.
to be fixed.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know what the name of the company is that did the Doom Eternal, but it looks like they definitely, at this point, brand reputation management crisis is at foot. And not saying right, wrong, or anything. It's what you just said actually is, I think, probably where us as old composers, as we drift into the sunset of,
I'm closer than you.
Exactly, is hopefully, like what I'm doing right now is I'm helping composers or songwriters and stuff, do certain things and get to their next levels on a different, capacity. But I think what you just said was really super important. And I think personally, with your experience and the wisdom that we've gained for actually making it into our 60s and still being able to talk about it, is paramount. I think where your conversation going into helping other new composers, understanding the hows and the whys as part of your trajectory as we do what we do, I think is really super important, because without a doubt, it does sound like the aging of the whiskey, if you would, is at a place right now where, because the stress is off of both you and I about not having a dog in the hunt to build our careers and become something that we can turn around and kind of reflect on stuff and say, oh shit, look at these composers coming up. They're going through some things that are some of them are new to us, like going, I can't believe that they're trying to pull that on these composers. And some of it is like, did you read your contract though? Because if that said that there, then emotionally you may have done something and not realized that, no, this is what it says, and you have to, which, as you perfectly explained, creatives are a lot more emotional and passionate and stuff. And if their attorney says, yeah, no problem, this is all really good, this is fine, don't worry, you're going to get a paycheck and this will be, but there's that one little paragraph or that one little sentence there that says, however, in perpetuity too, until the next supper, Apostles' Party of 12, right this way.
In all universes, yeah.
And every format, kind of a thing. So, I feel without a doubt, strictly only from what I read, I feel from what Mick's going through, it's incredible how articulate and detailed that thread was. I mean, and like Nick Nocturnal said, he's got receipts, but the thing is that it's just tough for me, because it hurts, because I wish I would have settled this off social media. Because now it has completely changed. Like I said earlier, it's elevated a negative relationship between the two individuals, and has also maybe dinged the brand a little bit. I don't know. I don't keep an eye on stocks or anything, but I think without a doubt the gaming industry is still at its embryonic beginnings when you compare to like when movies and films started, let's say in the 30s and the 40s. And
this is interesting. So here's a little well-known fact, but I think especially some of the younger people probably don't know this. But like when movies first started, it was the business guys who were in charge of movies in the silent era, and the studios built up control over everything immediately. And 100 years ago, like 3 popular artists, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and I think director D.W. Griffith, all got together and said, this isn't right. We shouldn't let the studios be in charge of everything. The best thing to do is let's start our own thing. So they started a thing called United Artists.
Ooh.
So
I didn't know
So
that.
you know how
Sure,
famous United Artists is.
sure.
Well, of course, whether United Artists always did the right thing or anything else, that's not the point. The point is that even back then, the natural thing is for the business people to think that they should be in control of everything, the means of production, and control the lives of the artists. And the artists go, well, wait a minute. Actually, people are coming to see us and to see our artistic work, and we have passion about this. What if we get together and become United Artists? So, this is the kind of thing that happens over and over. And I think what you're saying about the game industry being basically a new industry. When we first got into the games industry, I thought we might actually be a little late. I thought the game industry had been around for so long that maybe it was late, but it turns out we got in at a good time. But I remember telling Mike, I said, look, we're getting into a place that's the Wild West, that there's like almost no laws, there's no rules, which is why I was able to say I'm audio director, because there was no tradition.
Right.
So I
build the position and you shall be hired.
Yeah. But the main thing about the game industry is it primarily came from not entertainment, but software. So and what was software mostly doing years and years ago? It was business. And this is, believe it or not, was one of the main reasons why nobody thought Microsoft getting into the games industry, that's insane. Well, it kind of was insane. And I will maintain to this day that one of the disconnects from Microsoft being in the games industry is essentially that they came from a business-oriented software position. And that's in their DNA. That's how they approach things. They're not a company that came from entertainment. And this is the difference, I think, fundamentally between Microsoft and Sony, is that Sony has a very long history of creating entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make Sony better than Microsoft or anything else. It's just you have to sort of look at what's the experience of the people who are in charge of things. And if they don't really understand entertainment as deeply as somebody else does, some of those mistakes might get made. So I think we're still in a historical place where the game industry can mature and make some choices that are better for the health of the industry than some of the choices I'm seeing being made right now. So
yeah, that to
might
me
sound
seems
kind of vague, but it's what
no,
I
that was
believe.
perfect. That was perfectly worded. I just feel that like this Mick Gordon situation is kind of a Heimlich maneuver. Little fur balls coming out. I'm sorry, theater of the mind, but a fur ball's coming out of like the realization of something I've said to many artists in the days when I had a recording studio in Studio City, California, and I was doing demos. I said, first of all, there's no regulations in the music business, and there's no HR in the entertainment business.
Yeah.
And so it is still Wild West. It just so happens that the top gunslingers are attorneys, and that's just how it is.
Here's my experience. The people who always make out, no matter what, are the attorneys. The lawyers always do great.
We missed our calling.
Yes.
But, I think...
in terms of social media, let me just give you one more little pearl of wisdom from the old guy. I had a rule which is don't drink and tweet, which changed into, think before you tweet, or if you're not sure, don't tweet. And now it's just don't tweet.
You can't say anything. I think if there's a big lesson about this Mick Gordon situation going on right now, is that nothing is private anymore.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm lucky I'm still not in the business in that capacity. But at the end of the day, Hawaii is a single person record law. I don't have to get consent from you to record something. Okay. So here I can record anything I want, stockpile all my recordings, conversations with attorneys and stuff, and all that sort of stuff, and put them in a folder and something. And if something of this Mick Gordon thing was to blow up, I can go back into it and just say, screw it, here's what I'm doing. I'm putting it out on social media. We're going to have a jury and a judgment by social, kind of a thing. And at the end of the day, that doesn't bode well for those two who might have ill intent on trying to take advantage of people, because nothing is not sanctimonious. Nothing is, what's that word I'm looking for? That
Sacred?
word. Sacred. Mahalo. Thank you. Yeah, sacred. I think you yourself also went through a little bit of a cleansing period where you pulled a bunch of stuff off and took a break from social media for your own personal reasons, and now you're kind of coming back to life again. I guess a little water on the creative garden, and feeling it's time again, which is perfect transition to this next quick section I want to talk about.
Sure.
You're back. You're back. I kind of went through a couple things, and I went, I'm doing some homework on
Sure.
who's this Marty O'Donnell guy. He goes, oh, Marty's disappeared. Marty's pulled these things. Is Marty okay? Oh, his last video was farewell with a black, oh shit. And then all of a sudden you're gone, and then you're starting to repopulate. What is coming for us in the future from Marty O'Donnell?
I have always been, I'm a passionate person, and some people would say I'm a bit of a drama queen, and I wear that badge with no problem. I'm still in the middle of some things that are decades long in terms of contracts and legalities and all sorts of things, and I'm still sort of having to finish some of these legal entanglements. At a point, I don't know what it is, 9-10 months ago, I had a Discord channel called the Marty Army, and it was great. And I was talking to
That's
people,
cool.
and I had, interviews, like my own sort of podcast thing. And I ended up I had a lot of content on a YouTube channel, and certain things started to happen legally that were just not healthy for me. And the easiest thing was, and for my own mental health and my family's health, the easiest, best thing was to say, okay, fine, I'm out. Take everything down, everything's private, nothing's public, and here's my little farewell drama video. But it's a simple farewell.
Black background, though. It was like very cynical looking.
Yeah. And, I had done an arrangement a few years ago of Silent Night that's on piano, and people liked it. And they're like, so I used that because it was like, I'm going to be silent now. So that's all that meant.
You're such the director. That was a director's move,
Yes. And so what I also put The Rest is Silence, which is, Hamlet's last words before he commits suicide, which I just knew it as The Rest is Silence. What I'm basically saying, I'm going to be silent for a while. And I even said, look, so long, farewell. It means we'll meet again sometime. Some point in the future, I'll be back. But some people got pretty like, what does he mean? What's going on? Which is fine. A little mystery, I have no problem with. I'm not completely out of the woods yet. At some point, I am going to tell the full story as fully as I can. For anybody who might be interested, it might be 5 people who say, well, that's interesting. It might be more. Who knows? I do think truth is important, and I have no problem explaining some of what's gone on in my own journey in my own life. And some of this might just be that I keep it as wisdom for other composers who I see going through similar things. We'll see. I don't know what it's going to be. But I still enjoy sharing things that I'm working on with people, the public in general. I'm going to be very slow, very methodical. And the fun thing about doing this podcast with you is that you're not directly already in the game industry. So this is sort of a tangential way of dipping my toe back in the podcast water.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I just didn't,
I really
making that comment on my Twitter, I was like, what? Out of a million things he could be doing and stuff, he comes across mine and you give me the comment. And like I said at the very beginning, that path, you just never know where that path takes us into the next thing, but creatively, musically, you're not done writing. I mean, are you writing for yourself? Are you doing things
if you look at my latest tweet, I think I linked to I brought my Bandcamp site back up, which has one piece on it now for the public. Everything else is still private. I will bring stuff back. I have to be careful as to how and what and why I'm able to do. But from this point forward, my attitude is I'm writing music for me. I'm owning it. I'm sharing it when I want. I'm thinking about what I want to do with my music. And for a variety of reasons, I have decided to, maybe this will work out, maybe it won't. Maybe I'll still do a Christmas album. I don't know, starting with Silent Night. Right now I'm thinking about writing a Requiem Mass for a cappella choir.
Okay, Mozart, here we go. I could see it. The second you said that, let me get the big hat and the black cape, and I'm going to just stand over you. Go, Marty, go.
But you know what? I mean, it's a wonderful it's a wonderful thing to do that thousands of composers have done. So I'm not reinventing the wheel, but I'm going to take, I love choir, I love choral music, and I was sort of inspired to write the Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. So I wrote that. So you can see it. If you go to Twitter right now, you can click on it. And
I'm going to put down below will be all of your, whatever you send me to put down, just so that whoever's watching it comes across this.
Sure. That'd be great.
No, without a doubt. I know you want your little check mark.
No, I got the check mark.
Oh, you did?
I did. I finally got it. I know I complained about it in some older podcasts.
I did. I looked and go, what check mark is he talking about? Wait, which one?
It's a YouTube check mark, yeah. And I got the Twitter check mark. I got the YouTube check mark. And for some reason, even though I was completely gone and inactive for 10 months or whatever, the check mark stayed. And I still have...
Because you're legit.
I guess. I didn't pay for it, everybody. I just have...
Yes, before that whole thing happened, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's wonderful. Yeah, you're constantly creating.
In general, the jury is still out on social media. I notice, especially in this Mick Gordon thing, I see many people making videos about it, and they're like, well, we buy the game, so we have the right to know all the details. Yeah. And I'm sort of like, yeah, no, you don't. You're the consumer, and you have a lot of consumer rights, but you don't necessarily have the right to know all the details. I think feeling like you have the right to know all the details is a result of not consumerism, but social media. Somehow we feel like we should be the judges, and we should know all the evidence, and now we'll make the decision. And it's like you'll never get to a final conclusion, because somebody else will have a different interpretation. And then you guys will just keep arguing over the same territory. So that's my main thing about this whole thing is like some of this, if you could, like, and I was guilty of it, of exposing things in social media that probably shouldn't have been exposed.
We all go through that.
Yeah. And so, I'm careful about what I say on podcasts like this. I still think being truthful is the right way to go.
Right.
But some things just don't play out well in Twitter and Instagram and Reddit. And trust me, I have stepped in it many times. Stepped on it too, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the emotional stench that comes out of it, haha, I played into that. You see how I did that? No, yeah, but it is tough. That's the world that we're in, because we can reach back to remember pre-1997 internet days that this stuff did not happen, and it really didn't start happening and finding out about how bad record artists had really bad bum deals until the VH1 special, and then start exposing, that whole thing. Is that this is systemic. Mick's issue is huge. Now it's huger because of the internet and social media and what it has become, I think, out of a desperation to protect his name and his brand, and or whatever that whole thing is about. But
as an independent contractor, a creative independent person, there is no doubt your reputation is everything. Your career is gone if you've lost your reputation.
That's what it felt like.
Really, this stuff is really important, no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's what it felt like when I read through it. I was like, oh my God, this is it. He is on the last thread on the cliff, hanging off of a branch, going, I've tried everything. It seems like, I'm not saying that it is that, but that's what this presentation seems like, and then you just got to go, oh, dude, I'm so sorry that you got to go through this, and but this is part of what I believe. You, moving into the future as well, will be able to put the ice packs on younger composers' headaches, and be like, no, here's what you got to do, here's what you can. If that's the direction you may go into in the future with that, I think that's an important thing.
I am absolutely looking at that very, very closely. Being able to share stories, provide fairness, and in some way be an advocate for the game industry to do better. That's it. And I'm looking at, what I might be able to do to be part of that. So,
well, that's great. I think I love the fact that you're doing, still, writing and moving forward with your Requiem and stuff. Myself, I've had to reinvent myself. I was completely fried, thousands and thousands of tracks in libraries up until about 5 years ago. I hated my studio. And I only picked up my guitar to just maybe listen to some YouTube, some Alan Hallsworth or something, and play to it. And vaguely play to it, but just get influenced and have fun. Yeah. But, this whole thing with the heavy metal channel popped up because my daughter said, hey, you ought to do a reaction. Remember how you used to teach us on this? And so that turned into its own thing. Yeah. And it reinvigorated me. I was really surprised because that channel, I actually bought a 7-string guitar and I went, oh, what's this chugging? This is really kind of cool stuff. One thing moved to another, and then I got, turned on to more progressive metal and different genres. And then I opened up this channel that this video is on because I got pigeonholed into being a heavy metal, rock, prog rock reactor, which that term reactor too is another one that makes me want to go. But I was more than that in the sense that I love EDM, hip hop, techno, or cultural music from other countries using their own instruments with their own beautiful melodies. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, diving into the OST, which in the weirdest way, back to what you said, that one great thing that you said about the path, we don't know what that path is, took me into a place where now I opened up this kind of ethereal ambient ASMR style channel where there's just long videos of about an hour of very simple music, but sometimes I'll go out back and chuck the drone up in the air and get some shots of the water, or I've gone and got some graphic motion design that's looped from a stock company and stuff. Sure. And being able to take this new energy of me going, well, I'm reinvigorated again. Let me do something positive and put out this positive, ethereal, non-anxiety kind of stuff so that people can set it and forget it in the background. Yeah. You hear little things happening. It's not compositional, huge pieces of work, but it's really unique on how this path has taken me into a place of creativity where I could still feel somewhat, oh, wow, I can open up the old dusty composer toolbox in my head and have a little fun, So I think for both of us, that's going to be very important until our own Requiem is played at our own funeral.
Well, the thing for me is that because, I'm a creative person, when bad enough stuff happens in your life around some of your creativity, the worst thing that can happen is if you saying, I never want to create ever again. Yeah. And there was a point where I'm like, why bother? Why should I ever write music? Why should I compose? Mm-hmm. And that's a bad place to be. It's a dark place. I was there for a while, and God brought me out of there. I'm just going to say that was like, it's a spiritual place you don't want to be, especially if you're made to be a creator or a composer, for example. You might have some tough times to go through, but it's like you got to get back to that, and I'm glad I am. So I'm on the other side of that, and it looks like you are too. That's great.
Well, this is a perfect way to end this with that kind of wisdom and energy and stuff, because truly, no matter where we sit in the side chain, if you would, of creative participation, be it in movies, TV, film, games, or whatever it is that we do, that hollow feeling, that dark place of not ever wanting, is not a place you want to be. And the good thing is, though, inherently, each one of us who are creative in that capacity has that still burning and fire in us. So even if we do hit that little journey of oh man, I'm just not feeling it, that flame's still there. And all you have to do is turn on the pilot light. I'm sorry, I'm just a metaphor guy. Hey, listen, Marty.
No, you're absolutely right. I hear you.
I can't tell you, this was a hell of a long podcast, and I'm probably going to chop a little bit of it, but
chop it, buddy.
I can't tell you how wonderful this conversation was on just a couple of old guys talking about music stuff, as well as I always get enlightened when I speak to people that have experiences similar to mine, but yet in a different capacity. I can't tell you how thankful I am for you to have taken out the time and energy
Well,
for this.
Yeah, I'm glad I saw the video and you responded and got this going, because this has been a really fun, enlightening thing for me to talk to you. So,
Well,
let's keep it going.
yes,
I'll
definitely.
visit Hawaii, or you'll visit Las Vegas. And
Yes, when you come out here, I got you guys covered. Go
Oh,
surfing, go
Yes.
whatever it is. Shave ice, I got you all covered for sure. And if I go out to Vegas, you just give me a.
I got you. Yeah, exactly.
So listen, thank you so much. I definitely look forward to talking to you more in the future, as I'm
Yeah.
sure things will arise. I will put all for the people who are watching this. If you're still here, my friends, type in
Yeah.
"I'm still here."
Congratulations for being here.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm still
exactly.
here. I like that one.
I'm still here, and all the links for Marty's social media and other things are going to be down below, his Bandcamp and stuff. So go check him out over there. Marty, thank you so much for taking the time and hanging out. And like I like to say at the end, all right.
Thanks. See everybody.